A couple of weeks ago, I covered the Electromechanica Solo, a three-wheeled, single-seat commuter vehicle that was designed to fit somewhere between a motorcycle and a car. It offered the space benefits of a motorcycle and the driving characteristics of a car. And its price, $18,500 before incentives. The company behind the Solo want to revolutionize commuter vehicles. They want us to stop driving big, heavy, gas-guzzling SUVs to get to work and back home again. Today, I'm going to be reviewing what I think is probably one of its closest competitors, the Arcimoto FUV. FUV, in case you're not sure, stands for Fun Utility Vehicle. And this weekend, we've got one on loan from Arcimoto, who, by the way, are based here in Oregon, and they're going to let me put it through its paces. It starts from $17,900, which is a little bit less than the Solo. And unlike the Solo, it has two seats, not one. You can carry a friend along too. I'm just about to see whether it delivers on those promises. And with more than 50 kilowatts at the wheels, I think it might. I'm starting today's review on some country lanes, and while that might not feel like the place that the Arcimoto FUV is best suited, most people think of it as a city vehicle, I'm actually really impressed at how well it handles country lanes. Country lanes for the FUV, just like any motorcycle or motorcycle derivative, are where these vehicles are the most fun. Pushing the trike, in this case, through a corner, figuring out where the exit point is, and then opening up the throttle. The thrill, the handling, it just feels right for this vehicle. It's powered by a 19.2 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery pack that sits right in the center of the vehicle. It can be charged using a level 1 or a level 2 charging unit. I have a level 2 charging station at my house, so it's possible to charge from empty to full in under 4 hours. If you want the extended range, which gives you access to about 100 miles of real-world city riding, you can enable extended range, which charges the battery beyond 80-something%, gives you a full 100% charge, but like many other electric vehicles, when charged to full, it does mean that you cannot use regenerative braking. That means that when the vehicle is fully charged and you first get behind the steering column or the handlebars, you're going to have to use the foot brake rather than the throttle-activated regenerative braking. That's not a problem for me. I'm a biker. I'm used to using my right foot to slow things down. Like a quad bike, there's quite a lot of weight up front. In fact, like any 2+1 derivative of trike, you have a lot of weight at the front to steer. At slow speeds, this means it's nigh on impossible to get the handlebars to turn. At speed, well, it's pretty lightweight. With 19.2 kilowatt hours of lithium-ion batteries just located down the center of the Arcimoto FUV, it's basically right between my legs, you don't feel a whole lot of this vehicle's weight. It's about 1,300 pounds all in, and that's heavy for a motorcycle, but it's lightweight for an electric vehicle. That said, you don't feel the weight when you're moving. There's plenty of torque available from the 77 brake horsepower motor, and the 0 to 60 sprint time, that's 0 to about 98 kilometers per hour, takes 7.5 seconds. Sitting in traffic, crawling along, we're actually on a country lane right now, but we're behind some cyclists up in front. Sitting at 10-11 miles per hour is a breeze. It's very quiet at this speed, and you just hold it on the throttle. There's no kind of vibration that you feel in the handlebars that you might do on a bike, and because you've got the windscreen acting as an air brake, you don't get any buffeting, which means actually you feel a lot more refined riding this than you might in, say, a regular motorbike. In terms of controls, this is very much like a motorcycle. You've got your indicators on the left-hand handlebar. They are not self-cancelling, but they're push to cancel like most motorcycles are. You've got a horn switch like you'd find on a motorbike, and you've got your light switch. The one thing you don't get is a headlight flasher, which most motorbikes coming to market today have, and I wish that this had, because I actually use my headlight flasher reasonably frequently in the car, and I think it would be a really good utility for the FUV, and I hope that Aotearoa consider adding that in the future. Moving over to the right hand, you've got your throttle, which obviously allows you to control how fast the motor and you are going. You've got your direction switch, forwards and reverse. Then you've got your kill switch, which is just like a motorcycle kill switch, and I suspect is because the control interfaces for this have clearly come over from some motorcycle or other. There's even space for a mirror that is, of course, not required. But where things get different is the regenerative braking. Now, I've ridden motorcycles in which you roll off the throttle and you're given regenerative braking. But in this vehicle, there is a very small brake-like lever that sits just under your index finger, and it allows you to slow down the FUV without touching the brake pedal. There's also a brake pedal which is down by my right foot, which will be familiar to motorcycle riders, and that operates the vehicle's standard friction brakes. But if you need to slow down like I am right now, you just dial in with your index finger, and it's very intuitive. It's kind of fun. It's slightly also bizarre for me because right now I've got a scooter on review that uses the very same mechanism as a throttle, but if you've ridden anything with handlebars and a throttle and a brake lever, you will understand pretty instinctively how to slow down the FUV. I've talked about control interfaces, but let's talk about how it feels to actually ride and drive the Aotearoa FUV. Unlike the Solo EV that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, the FUV gives me so much feedback as to where I am in the road, how much throttle I need, how much brake I need, and what the steering is doing. It reminds me in many ways of the feel that the quad bikes that I've ridden on farms and off-road have had over the years. You've got that same weight up front, that same weight distribution. Because this is a front wheel vehicle, you're very much aware of what the front wheels are doing at all times. Now, there are some downsides to this. Primarily, it is possible, extremely possible in fact, to understeer with this vehicle. If you're going too quickly and you don't put enough force on the front wheels, you do understeer quite dramatically. If you are moving at speed and you find that you need to slow down in a hurry for a corner, you are going to have to use both the regenerative braking and also the foot brake, because that's the only way really that you're going to be able to stop any squirreling or any issues there. You might be wondering why I'm wearing a helmet in the FUV, especially as all of the press materials that you've probably seen show people riding them without a helmet. Well, there's two reasons. The first one is that I have a microphone hidden just here so that you can hear what's going on. It's an easy way of me recording my voice without having a whole lot of wind noise, and there is a fair amount of wind noise in the FUV. But the second one is just comfort.
I've discovered that I actually prefer wearing a helmet when I'm in the FUV, partly because it's still pretty cold here in Oregon in the early part of April, and partly because it means that my ears don't get cold while I'm riding along. One of the supporters of Transport Evolved actually has one of the very first FUVs to be made, and I know he generally just wears a hat and gloves, and I could probably see myself doing that if I owned one for any length of time. But for the purposes of a short weekend borrowing of this vehicle, and obviously because I am going to be doing a review and need the microphone, I just decided to put a microphone on the helmet and then wear the helmet instead.
The other reason why I like wearing a crash helmet when I am riding the FUV is another practical one. There are really no cubby holes in the FUV. There's no place to put anything up here in front of me. There are 2 cup holders, but that's about it. And so for me to drive on a sunny day means that I would either have to be fiddling in my pockets to find my sunglasses, or I can just wear my motorcycle helmet, which has a built-in sun visor, and so I must admit that also came into play here. Whether or not you need to wear a crash helmet does depend on where you are in the world and what your local regulations are. Here in the state of Oregon, the FUV, which is made in Oregon, is classified as a semi-enclosed vehicle. It has not 1, but 2 seat belts per person. They are both 3-point seat belts, so you're nicely secured in the vehicle at all times, and I've never felt like I'm going to fall out or anything like that. And for Oregon, that's good enough. You don't have to wear a crash helmet. In the neighboring state of Washington, which is, 10 miles away from where I am right now, you do have to wear a crash helmet. So I know people with FUVs who sometimes wear a crash helmet and sometimes not, often based on where they're going. Alright, we're just about to hit the freeway, so let's see how this performs on the freeway, and you can get an idea of how flexible and versatile the FUV can actually be when it's not in a city environment. I'm on Highway 26 here on the west side of Oregon, and I'm heading into Portland to get my COVID vaccine. I'm not really going particularly fast, I'm just keeping up with traffic, and at this speed the FUV is a really nice ride. I don't feel any wind buffeting, I don't feel like I'm being pushed around. It feels solid and it feels planted. And interestingly, at this speed, it doesn't feel like a 3-wheeler. It feels more like a 2-wheeler or maybe even a 4-wheeler. I feel that I don't have to worry about positioning myself. I occasionally get a bit of buffeting from a side wind, but that's because there are no doors. There's nothing unpleasant about this. I think if it was raining in this direction, I would get very quickly. But it's another reason to consider wearing motorcycle gear when piloting the FUV. Like other motorcycles I've reviewed, this has the aerodynamic qualities of a brick, which means around town it's very good at being very efficient at slow speeds. And in fact, if you drive this at round town speeds, you're going to get about 100 miles of range out of that 19.2 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery. But as you can probably tell, if you're increasing your speed a little bit in order to keep up with traffic, the wind noise does increase, and you will also notice that your range starts to plummet. In fact, if you were to drive this flat out, 75 miles an hour, then I think you'd probably get somewhere in the region of 30 to 40, maybe 50 miles of range, depending on how heavy you are as a rider, depending on the headwind conditions, and depending on other road conditions. You do get an awful lot of attention when you're driving this, and that's for good reason. Obviously, the FUV is unlike anything else on the road today, and at highway speeds, I think people are kind of surprised that something that looks like this is capable of doing 75 miles an hour, is capable of keeping up with traffic and executing the odd overtaking maneuver. Even at 50, if I open the throttle, it's still got more to give. It's certainly not as quick as, say, the Energica SS9, but it's about nearly twice the weight of the Energica SS9, and it does show. But then you can carry stuff in this, you've got extra luggage capabilities, and you're a lot safer than you would be on a motorcycle. That was a really good example of me needing the power to get out of trouble. There was a Prius Prime pulling into the slow lane, and there was somebody right next to me, and I needed to just get out of the way or slow down, and I opted to just get out of the way. Opening the throttle gave me tons of power, and I was able to safely and swiftly get out of trouble. And that is something that bikers will be well and truly familiar with. On a motorcycle, it is always important to be able to have that extra power available to you in case a car driver decides to do something stupid, because at the end of the day, while the Arcimoto weighs about 1,300 pounds, it is smaller than every other four-wheeled vehicle on the road, even though this is only a three-wheeled vehicle. And although it's slightly larger than most motorbikes, I think the fact that there's this weird three-wheeled trike going past you kind of means that people tend to steer towards you. It's that kind of, they're so transfixed on what is this that they forget that they need to actually be smart and safe and not hit you. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you'll know that I am a fan of weird and wonderful vehicles, and in fact I used to own a Renault Twizy. I've actually owned two Renault Twizys. My Renault Twizy was the most fun I've ever had on four wheels. It was not necessarily the quickest thing out there, although it did have insane performance. It also was incredibly nimble, and by that I mean that in towns I could just weave in and out of things. I didn't have to worry about waiting to get through tight gaps. I could just go, and it had a top speed officially of about 55 miles per hour. But one of the things that didn't work well in that original Twizy was the fact that its top speed was a bit slow. Now, there were people who figured out a way of making the Twizy go faster, and they figured out a way of making the Twizy go faster by hacking the controller of the Twizy, giving it a top speed of closer to 70 miles per hour, sometimes slightly more in some cases. With this vehicle, you don't have to do that because it already goes at freeway speed. It already does 75, and like I say, I think it's possible to get it up to 80 if you try really hard. And that is phenomenal for a vehicle that most people think of as a city trike. When you're moving at city speeds, your range really does creep down very slowly. When you're going faster, you definitely will lose a lot of range really quickly. But at slow speeds around town, I think I genuinely could do 100 miles out of this and not have a problem. Is there anything that I'd like to change about the FUV? Well, part of me wonders what the FUV would be like if it was fully enclosed. And I think the answer is not quite as fun. Now, whether that is because I'm a biker and I like being connected to the outside world, or whether that's because extra doors would make more rattles, I don't know. But I really like this vehicle. It reminds me a lot of my original Renault Twizy, a vehicle that I thoroughly loved and was incredibly sad to get rid of. Now, as you all know, the Renault Twizy is a four-wheel, not a three-wheel vehicle, and that means that it certainly, on paper, it should be a lot more stable than the Arcimoto FUV, but honestly, this does not feel unstable at all, and that's partly because it's got a nice long wheelbase, and partly because the FUV is so darned well set up. Who is the Arcimoto FUV for? Well, I think it's for people who like bikes, like me, who maybe don't want to have a two-wheeler. For me, there are some health reasons as to why a three-wheeler might be more sensible for me right now. But also people who want to carry more than a bike might offer. But it's also for small businesses, because Arcimoto has managed to reinvent the FUV multiple times. There's the upcoming Roadster, which is hopefully heading into production at some point soon, which is like this, but without any of the top. That is much more like a motorcycle trike, a traditional motorcycle trike. There's no windscreen, there's no roll cage, and you have to wear full motorcycle gear to ride it. But then there's the whole Deliverator, which is like the FUV that I'm in, except instead of the passenger seat, there's a cargo area, which you can imagine means you can store an incredible amount of stuff. And then there are emergency responder versions. Because this is so small, because this is so nimble, you can actually use this as a first response emergency vehicle, much like you might have someone on a motorbike with all of the essential gear enabling them to get to an accident or an incident really quickly. And Arcimoto have been trialing one of these with a fire department, fully loaded with lights and sirens and everything else, and it's proving very popular because it's lightweight, it's cheap to use, it's pretty instinctive to drive, and you also have the ability to easily get in and to get out, and you can ride through areas where a car wouldn't traditionally go, and that makes it very special indeed.
So there you have it. I think I want one. No, let's scrap that. I know I want one. The FUV is everything that the Solo isn't. It's fun, it's fast, it's responsive, and it makes you engage with the road, with the experience of traveling. You're not in some hermetically sealed cabin with poor air conditioning. You've got access to the outside world. And yes, eventually you'll be able to get doors for the FUV too. If you want to go completely bare bones, then you can forget about the luggage area at the back. You can just have a standard motorcycle cargo rack setup. You can put a top box or whatever you want there. And if you want to carry large amounts of stuff, well, you could opt for the Deliverator instead of the two-seat FUV. The Deliverator gives you much more cargo space if it's just you, and that means that you could get almost as much stuff in the back of this as, say, a regular mid-sized hatchback or sedan. But what really strikes me about the FUV is it's not trying to be a car. It's not trying to be a motorcycle. It's trying to be the FUV. On this channel, we've talked several times about how Arcimoto is breaking all of the rules. The rules that say that three-wheelers are never going to sell well. The rule that says that people need doors and windows and heaters in order to want one. Arcimoto breaks all of those rules. It gives you a motorcycle-like control interface that is intuitive. Yes, it takes a while to learn how to steer this if you are not someone who's had experience with a sidecar or any other kind of four or three-wheeled handlebarred setup. But once you get used to it, it is incredibly intuitive to use. The regenerative braking can be used to completely stop this without even needing to use the foot brake. In fact, I'm only using a foot brake in an emergency. It's kind of that backup setup that you can use. You have a windscreen, you have a windscreen wiper, you have heated seats and heated handlebars. Granted, they are optional extras, but I would recommend anybody considering an FUV get one, unless you live in Southern California or Florida or somewhere where it never really gets super cold. If there's one thing I would really criticize the Arcimoto FUV for, it's its price. Right now, it is still way too much money for what it is. It offers a whole lot more than the Solo EV, let me be completely clear. But even then, it's a little bit too expensive. But Arcimoto is working on that. Arcimoto is refining the design. Arcimoto is working with Sandy Munro to bring down the cost of this vehicle, and ultimately hopes to knock off a sizable chunk of cash. At the end of the day, Arcimoto wants to sell this for about $12,500 US. And that makes this incredibly exciting. That makes this Renault Twizy price, which brings me to my final thing. In the UK, I owned a Renault Twizy. I liked it because of its go-kart feel, its direct and responsive driving, its very planted feeling when you were on the road, and that was thanks to its outboard wheels. The Arcimoto FUV offers that same kind of experience, except without any of the quadricycle rules that restricted the Twizy to 50 miles per hour. That meant that you couldn't do certain things with the Twizy. This thing officially tops out at 75 miles per hour, although I've heard that it can do 80. The name FUV is exactly what this vehicle is. It's fun, it's got utility, and it's a vehicle, but it's one like no other vehicle I've seen before. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.